So for the next part of my Pretty Little Liars series, I thought I would check out the books. Now, I've made a lot of videos about this show, but a lot of you guys kept bringing up that the books did a lot of things way better than the TV show did. So as you can imagine, I was really interested by that. So naturally, I went and read all the books in the series. This will probably be a video in 2 parts because there are like 18 books in the series, so it's a lot to talk about. They're not always the most best written, like in terms of literature skills at points. I feel like certain storylines could have been written in a better way or articulated better, but overall, when you look at the characters and who they fall in love with and a lot of the progression of the plot, it's just done better, especially with characters like Ezra and Emily. They're handled way better. So I really want to talk about this today with you guys. I can already tell this will be one of my favorite videos on my channel because I love doing deep dives into books. So let's talk about it. Let's start with the first book, which is just called Pretty Little Liars. It's the first one in the series, and it's quite similar to the show in some ways because you've got the girls having secrets that only Allison knew about, and then Allison disappears during a sleepover with the girls in the summer before 8th grade. And then the story jumps 3 years later when the girls are living their own lives and don't speak to each other. I think the timeline is slightly different to the one in the show because in the show they were older, around 15 I think, when Allison went missing. Just to give you an idea of the characters and my first impressions of them, Aria is actually, in my opinion, very similar to how she is in the show, personality-wise. She's quite quirky, she's got a big imagination, she's a bit of an oddball, but in a good way. I think she's her own person. She's still got her pet pig puppet, Pigtunia. As for Hannah, she is very different to how she was in the show. In the show, Hannah is, yes, a bit into popularity, but you don't see loads about that affecting her relationships with other people. There are points, I guess, where she's worried about being friends with Lucas because Mona doesn't like Lucas, but overall, she kind of does her own thing and has her own set of values. And for instance, she's keeping Caleb in her house despite her mum's requests because she wants to look after Caleb and stuff like that, where she's really compassionate and warm-hearted. But in the books, she actually is very shallow and very unlikable, and to be honest, it kind of irritated me because I was hoping to see some huge character progression and development, but by the final book, she's improved a little bit and she is learning to overcome her obsession with popularity, but she's still quite self-obsessed and way too obsessed with being in cliques, and she calls other girls sluts a lot and judges other girls based on their appearance, and in terms of her body confidence as well, doesn't seem to progress much at the end. So that was a bit of a shame. I actually loved her storylines, but it's just in terms of her character, the way she behaves, she's not the best person, and the girls overall are actually way less likable than they are in the show. In the show, all the girls have so much to offer and they're actually people you could almost consider being your friends. They're quite fun, but not in the books particularly. I feel like they're a lot more flawed, and they also get into trouble and do bad things a lot more often, or get involved in things they shouldn't be involved in, such as Spencer. In the books, I do actually find her likable and someone you can empathize with, but she gets into a lot of trouble, especially with competing with Melissa over guys. And as for Emily, she is, in my opinion, way more likable and well developed in the books than in the show. I liked her a lot in the first season of the show, genuinely, but she became very boring pretty much at the start of season 2, mostly because of her continuous love interests. And although Emily did have quite a few love interests in the books, they were more well crafted, I thought, and more interesting love interests. And Emily plays such a huge role in the finale of the books that actually it's hard not to like her because she does such a cool 180 and really like battles a lot of inner demons, and her family doesn't treat her well, so I really like her. Allison Allison is another level. We'll talk about her later, maybe in part 2, but I really prefer the way they handled Allison's character in the books. Out of all the things they messed up in the show, out of all the things they underdeveloped or skimmed over, Allison must be the biggest screw up, because they had so much amazing inspiration from the books and they just didn't use it, which is such a shame. So there are issues, they're not perfect, but I would actually overall highly recommend you go and read the books. Yes, they're intense and crazy, a bit like a soap opera at times, but in the best of ways, and they're just really fun. But I will say, you'll get over it. It will take maybe the first book to get over it, but their appearances in the books are very different to in the show, and it does throw you off and confuse you a little bit, and you will adjust. But at first I was actually considering stopping reading the books because it was really distracting how my image of them in my head from the show is so different from how they look in the books, and it's just very weird for your brain. For instance, Hannah in the show, as we know, has kind of a curvaceous, that's not a word, curvy frame and blue eyes and blonde hair, and in the books she has like browny hazel eyes and auburn hair and is a very thin build and seems so different to in the show. And as for Arya, she's similar, but not really, because she's described as really tall and thin, whereas Lucy Hale's actually really short, and that's a part of her character in the show, is everyone talking about how cute and small she is. Black hair, I think, so it's quite confusing. And then Spencer, that's one of the weirdest ones, is obviously in the show she has brown eyes, brown hair, pale skin, but in the books she has green eyes and blonde hair, and I could not get over that. It bugged me so much. And as for Emily in the show, she has like dark hooded eyes and she has dark hair. In the books she has green light colored eyes and red hair, and she's pale with freckles. So I just could not get over it. It was so weird to read because it was like I was following a different character, and I had to keep reminding myself, no, this is Emily. The twists and turns are so much more purposeful and intentional, like the author actually had a plan and a sense of direction when she was writing it. Let's talk about the first book. Arya returns to Rosewood from a 3-year trip to Iceland with her family. So she was in Iceland for 3 years, not 1 like in the show. She doesn't end up marrying Ezra. In fact, I mean, he's there for a few books, but he's treated like a creep, and he's really insecure and clingy and weird, and he ends up going after another underage girl. She realizes Ezra's gross eventually, and then she goes and dates someone her own age, Noel Khan, who's a classmate of hers, and she ends up with him because he's actually appropriate. I was quite irritated by the number of predatory relationships there were in the books, with younger girls like Allison going after or being pursued by older boys. Let's say they were like 13, the guys were like 16. So it was gross, it was bad, and I didn't like how often it was popping up because it honestly felt exploitative and unnecessary. A lot of those things didn't need to be there. They weren't necessary for the plot, and I didn't like how much of the storylines were spent around Spencer and Allison competing over Ian and trying to get his attention, and I think Allison even flirted with Wilden at one point, so it was too much. They didn't end up marrying their English teacher like Arya did in the show, and the problem wasn't even just that he was her English teacher. It does actually influence the way we think when we're younger, especially if our parents don't talk to us about this stuff and there's no education around it. Having this girl marry her English teacher when she grows up does send a really bad message. It is irresponsible. The show didn't need to do it, and what makes me so angry is the show went out of their way to romanticize and glamorize grooming. They didn't need to do it because it wasn't even in the books. They should have had her end up with Noel Khan. Why didn't they do that? They know what happens in the books. Everyone knows what happens in the books. The fans loved it. Everyone liked Arya and Noel together. There was no issue there. It was a great relationship. So why would they go out of their way to abandon that and have her end up with her teacher? And this is a problem not just in the show. I'm being critical of the show, but it's a problem everywhere in Hollywood, where they think it's cool to show a child who's often acted by an adult, or a teenager who's acted by someone who's about 29 dating someone who's in their 20s or 30s or 40s, and it's not on. The predator is never really called out for abusing their power. It just sort of happens and everyone moves on. In the books, Noel is just better written. In the show, they demonize him and make him into this really boring character who's never really on the show, and when he is, he's an absolute jerk and involved in dodgy stuff for no reason and hates the liars. But in the books, he's a nice guy. He actually cares about Arya, and it's a really well-developed romance because she had a huge crush on him when she was younger. Then she grew up and matured a bit and moved on, but then he was pursuing her. It's cute. I really like them together. And as for Emily, she does actually date Maya in the books. Maya doesn't die. I don't know why they killed her off in the show. She does not die in the books. She and Emily just have quite a messy breakup, and realistically, you're not going to end up with the first person you properly date. Hannah is really determined to keep her queen bee status. She's really attached to Mona as a friend. Yes, the stuff they talk about is superficial, and underneath it all, you can tell that she does actually really care about Mona. In the show, it was more like Mona was just there, but often she'd dismiss Mona to go and hang out with her friends. In the books, it's the opposite. Sometimes the other girls actually feel awkward and like they shouldn't be there because they'll see Mona and Hannah giggling together and being friends, and they'll be like, oh, we should go. Then after the A reveal in the books, by the way, this happens in the later books, but Mona dies, which I did not like. And that's one thing the show did really well, is they saw the potential in Mona and kept her in the show to develop her character. And somehow killing her off in the books was a bit of a cop-out because we didn't get enough of an explanation as to what she was doing and who she was connected to. I didn't like how she disappeared from the story, especially because there was so much you can do with her. But as for Spencer, in the first book, she has serious problems with her relationship with her family and Melissa. This is a recurring problem throughout the books for a long time. And when I say her parents' treatment of her was abusive, it literally was. It was emotionally abusive. Same with Melissa. She'd say these awful things to Spencer, calling her a whore, and at one point it actually escalated into a physical fight between them. Everything was made into Spencer's fault. There are lots of problems with Spencer taking Melissa's guys, like Spencer takes an interest in Ren. There's this tug of war because then Melissa manages to get Ren to cheat on Spencer and go back to Melissa, but then Melissa decides she doesn't want him and dumps him, which was quite funny. But you know what's interesting is in the finale of the books, in the final book, Ren had disappeared for a long time, and I honestly thought we were never going to see him again. But then he comes back in the last book, and Spencer ends up with him, it's implied, which is bizarre because Melissa finally approves of their relationship. And my feelings are that I'm happy he was brought back, because it's annoying when characters just disappear off the show, and she'd had a lot of really boring and bad relationships by that point. So by the end of the books, I was happy for someone to come back who we actually knew. But another part of me is like, he's too old for you, dude. Like, way too old for you. And the way that their relationship started was kind of creepy, and I thought he was really immature with how he handled dating the both of them. When Melissa had dumped him, he then was like to Spencer, oh, this isn't going to work, and wasn't really explaining everything. It was just quite immature considering that he's older than her, so you'd think he would have some kind of maturity. Isn't that why people date older guys or older girls? Because they have like their shit together, they're mature, they've got their own business, or they're self-made. He didn't even have his shit together. He was such a mess, and she was being more mature about it than he was. What bugged me is his name was Ren Kim in the books. Ren Kim because he was half Korean, half British. They completely erased that in the show. In the show, he's white and British, and his name's Ren Kingston. So I'm not a fan of that erasure at all. I don't know why that was necessary. Couldn't they have just stuck to the books? Spencer's family had a huge reaction to her kissing Ren, even bigger than in the show. In the show, they were like, we're so disappointed in you, Spencer, ignoring Melissa's involvement in it. And to be fair, I really don't like that Spencer was dating her sister's boyfriends, okay, so I'm not dismissing that. But the parents didn't have any real insight into Melissa's involvement in this because it takes two to tango, right? The reason why Spencer was disregarding Melissa's feelings feelings so much, it's because Melissa was a cow and she didn't have any respect for Melissa, right? Their reaction in the books is so bad. They say it's just so despicable, and they're saying they're ashamed of her, disgusted, how could she? They wish they could kick her out of the house. After reading the first book, another interesting observation I have is that Hannah's relationship with her mom is way less close in the books. Throughout the books, she's trying to get to know her mum in a more close way, and it's only right at the end that her mum starts actually behaving like a mum and showing affection for Hannah and bonding with her. But in the earlier books, Hannah actually said that she couldn't remember the last time her mum had asked her a touchy-feely question, and their relationship was more boss-intern than mother-daughter. Whereas in the show, Hannah's relationship with her mum is one of the closest mother-daughter relationships on the show, if not the closest. Let's talk about the next book in the series now, which is Flawless. They start to believe the person behind the A threats is Toby after Toby commits suicide in the books, which is different to the show. Emily actually blames herself, and Toby is actually not a big part of the books at all. He's reasonably irrelevant, like he's not that important, whereas obviously in the show they made him into a really nice guy and made him end up with Spencer. Another thing I have a serious problem with is that Toby was actually abusing Jenna in the books, not the other way around. Toby was doing awful things to her physically, and she didn't want to tell anyone, and that's why he took the blame for the blinding incident, because he kind of knew he'd done a lot of bad things. Ages later, he was telling Emily, I feel terrible for what happened, I never do it again, but you don't necessarily know if that's actually true and why he suddenly realized it was the wrong thing to do, like why the change of heart now. In the show, he's made into a nice guy who the whole town's against, the world's against him, and it's reversed where Jenna is made into the abuser. Now, I have mixed feelings about this again. I like the idea of depicting a female abuser, but it wasn't handled well in the show either, because Jenna wasn't dealt with as the proper villain abuser she was, and Toby wasn't dealt with as someone who actually had a lot of trauma because of Jenna. So they didn't even handle it well. But also, why erase that? If it was him abusing her, why are you trying to erase it and make it that she's abusing him when that was never in the books? There's a lot of rivalry and negativity between Hannah and Aria, which takes ages to get resolved because they're kind of competing over Sean, and they're both quite unlikable because Hannah's being so judgmental towards Aria, not realizing that Aria can kind of date who she wants, to be honest, and they weren't really close friends at that time either. So if Aria wants to date Sean, I don't really see the problem. Aria is completely confused and wide-eyed as to why Hannah would be upset with her, which I also thought was very ignorant on Aria's part, and she could have been at least a little compassionate towards why Hannah would feel the way she did, considering Hannah had her heart set on Sean since like 6th grade. So you would think that Aria would be like, maybe he should be out of bounds, especially because Aria didn't seem that attached to Sean. It was a little weird. Like, girl, do you need to be in a relationship with him that much? Is he that exceptional? Because she kind of disrespected him later and cheated on him with Ezra. So I'm not really sure her heart was in it from the beginning. So if that's the case, why are you dating him? In this show, it's kind of pushed that they love each other so much and they're friends and they've come together really closely because of their shared trauma. They bond because of what happened to them with A pretty early on. Like a few episodes in, you see they're hanging out with each other more often, whereas in the books, it takes so long for them to actually start hanging out. And a lot of the time they're only hanging out because they have to discuss the A stuff, and then they just get on with their lives. And then as they start opening up to each other about stuff, something bad happens, I think involving when they're on holiday, and then they just disappear from each other's lives again, and then they have to work back to being friends again. Then there's this whole court case situation, which I loved and thought was so amazing in the final books, where they start again having problems, and especially was it Hannah and Spencer are just butting heads. They're in a really high stress situation, so they're taking it out on each other. In the show, it was like they were friends, but I was never really sure why they were friends, because it seemed like they were only really there to talk about A, and I wasn't sure how organic or realistic their connections were. Let's talk about the next book now, called Perfect. conflict. Aria's really upset because her mum's basically kicked her out of the house and doesn't want her around because she realized that Aria was lying to her for like 4 years about the whole cheating situation, so she is feeling very betrayed by Aria. So Aria actually goes to live with her now boyfriend Sean. Aria's still seeing Ezra at that point. Sean has his suspicions, so he informs the police. While Aria and Ezra are hanging out together, the police actually invade and go and grab him, so it's depicting it in a bit more of a negative light because the authorities are actually getting involved and treating it like a bad thing. And although I don't think Aria fully understood that she was being taken advantage of ever, I was glad that other people were having a bit more of a negative reaction to it. Hannah and Mona get into a fight and Hannah seeks comfort with an uncool boy named Lucas. This is the one big failing of the books in my opinion. If I have to criticize anything and say, oh, this wasn't very well done, it was Hannah's relationships. Hannah ends up with Mike in the books, Aria's younger brother. And to be honest, if the show did one thing well, it was introducing Caleb as a love interest. He's the best love interest on the show. He's not perfect, but he's kind, he's loving, he treats Hannah really well, he's really protective of her. And I love that they did that. I honestly think the showrunners and writers were looking at the books and they were like, Hannah's relationships are not good, so we're going to create someone completely new. And normally I don't like that, but I actually love that in the show. I do believe it was necessary because, or they could have had Lucas end up with Hannah, that would have been fine too, because in the books, Lucas dates Hannah for a while, but when they break up, she ultimately ends up with Aria's brother Mike, who's really gross. I'll get into that later, but I'm just not a fan of that relationship and it seems very superficial and forced and inorganic. They should have ended up together, Hannah and Lucas, 100%, because they have such a real connection. They had way more chemistry than her and Mike did, so much more. And it's one of those things where I did believe that Lucas could bring Hannah out of her shell. She was describing how when she was hanging out with him, she wasn't all dolled up, she didn't have makeup on, but she felt really good, she felt really confident. He wanted her to be healthy, he wanted the best for her. I felt like she really took a massive step back in terms of her growth when things ended with Lucas, because the whole reason it ended is because she was being a shitty human being and he actually had standards and he had to let her go because she was getting involved in all this drama in a really petty way, and he ended up breaking up with her. And a big part of her growth was realizing that maybe she should date him regardless of what the high school hierarchy says, despite the fact he's a bit nerdy. So it was a real shame that she ends up basically letting him go and he's the one that got away, because it makes me feel like she's not actually growing and she's way too influenced still by what other people think. Hannah goes to Mona's birthday party but gets completely humiliated by Mona. I wish this had been in the show. Again, this should have been in the show. Mona completely humiliates her, treats her like shit, laughs at Hannah when she rips her dress, makes fun of her. When Hannah wakes up in the hospital, she's having some serious memory loss, which means she can't remember Mona humiliating her at her party. And I think it's Lucas that lets her know, hey, Mona treated you like shit at the party. And then Hannah's like, did she? No, I'm sure she wouldn't, because she can't remember. We know then there's something seriously wrong with Mona because she's lying to Hannah, saying no, nothing happened at the party, everything was fine. She'd been a bully, but now she's taking it back and pretending nothing happened. In the next book, Unbelievable, Emily's parents catch her with Maya, so they send her to live with her strict religious relatives. And although she's safe from A, which is nice because she's obviously further away, she ends up being treated really badly by her relatives and she ends up basically going straight back to Rosewood and also realizing there is absolutely nothing she can do to change the way she feels about Maya or about girls in general. Like, she's not going to change. She's the most likable out of all the girls. The girls discover that Mona is A, so they're going to the police station to say that, but Mona basically kidnaps Spencer and drives her to Floating Man's Quarry, where she explains that she saw what happened on the night of the Jenna thing and she saw Jenna get blinded by Allison and the girls. She found Allison's diary, which contained the girls' secrets. She originally planned to frame her for Allison's murder, but recently grew to like her. In this show, again, it was not well handled. Spencer and Mona had like two conversations. One moment where Spencer thought, I maybe kinda like Mona, and the rest of the time did not seem to give a shit about her. They go together to A's lair and Mona kidnaps Spencer and there's this big confrontation, and the whole time I was thinking, why the hell is this happening? They don't know each other. Why is Spencer the one there one-on-one with Mona having this reveal? It should be Hannah there. And the reason why was because it happened in the books. It was Mona and Spencer one-on-one, with Mona saying to Spencer, hey, I kind of like you and I kind of want you to join the A team. I want you to be my friend. It made so much more sense. Her motive made a lot more sense. Also, it would not have helped that when she was being bullied by Allison, the girls were not stepping in to protect her. And this was done way better in the books too, because in the show it was the same way. The girls weren't supporting Mona when she was being bullied, but there's no real introspection happening on their parts where they realize the role they played in hurting Mona. Whereas in the books, the later books, it's brought up again because Spencer's running this website and she's messaging a few people on the website, and she messages one person and basically says, I was complicit when a girl was being bullied and now I've changed, but I kind of regret that. It was the wrong thing to do, to stand by and let it happen, which shows kind of some compassion on the girl's side and some awareness about where they screwed up. Now let's talk about Wicked, the next book in the series. A new A begins making threats, and Ian denies being Ali's killer. Emily finds herself confused about her sexuality yet again. She actually realizes she's attracted to Isaac, this boy. So she's like, wait, I thought I liked girls. Why am I liking a boy now? So she realizes over time that she's actually bisexual. I don't know why they erased her bisexuality on the show and just made her gay. It seems a little bit dismissive. Maybe they had a reason, but I find that really odd. Hannah is having a lot of conflict with her stepsister Kate, who was way more interestingly written in the books. A lot of Hannah's eating disorder actually stems from her stepsister and her dad, and the way her dad favors her stepsister and makes fun of Hannah in front of the stepsister because the stepsister Kate's all glamorous and dolled up, and Hannah just feels so incredibly inferior to her, so it did not help. By the end, Kate actually starts being way more respectful towards Hannah and getting over her issues, which I liked because it was extremely unexpected. Whereas in the show, Kate's dislike for Hannah had no reason. Yeah, Hannah said one bitchy thing about Kate, but Kate didn't even seem to like Hannah beforehand. It was just plain weird. And then she does everything in her power to sabotage Hannah, and then she disappears off the face of the earth. In contrast, in the books, Kate is a recurring figure. She doesn't just go away, because if Kate is her stepsister, she's going to be prevalent. Naturally, she's going to be there, which is way more realistic than in the show. Kate had set Hannah up to look bad, but then was saying to Hannah, oh, I actually want to be friends with you, but you're suspicious and sure she's lying. But you do actually start to fall for it, until one day Hannah overhears a phone call with Kate talking to her friends, where Kate's saying, oh, it's going to be awesome, we're going to humiliate her. And Hannah's not sure about the context or what Kate means, but she just has a really bad feeling because Kate's doing the snicker, like she's got something bad planned for Hannah. Hannah feels like Kate's about to expose her or say something humiliating, so Hannah gets in there first and says that Kate had herpes or something. She just tries to humiliate her because she's scared, and you realize throughout the books that Hannah is the most damaged out of all the girls in the sense that she actually needs a counselor. I think she actually has some kind of serious trauma, PTSD, or a mental illness, because it's nothing to be ashamed about, but it's something she needed help with because she's extremely, first of all, paranoid and disturbed after Mona's death, thinking everyone is out to get her and betray her. She has an eating disorder, serious issues relating to her self-worth and her dad, and just a lot of baggage there. I think she needed help with. She never really got help with, but she needed therapy basically. She exposes Kate in front of everyone, and her dad gets mad at her, and Hannah's like, no, don't be mad at me. Kate's out there to get me, and I heard her talking on the phone about me. And then Kate says, what are you talking about, Hannah? I was practicing my lines for a school play where I had to be planning something wicked, so I wasn't even on the phone at all if you just looked in and talked to me. And then you're like, oh fuck, you're like, oh my god, Hannah screwed this up so badly, she's jumping to conclusions, so you feel stupid. But Hannah, being her paranoid, perceptive self, still feels that something is wrong, so she says, well, which play were you rehearsing for, Kate? And Kate says, Hamlet, I think so, or Macbeth. And then immediately Hannah knows she's lying, because Hannah had read that play and she knew there was no dialogue saying anything that Kate had said when she was on the phone, so she just knows that Kate was indeed going to humiliate her at the party. One storyline I really didn't like is Arya has feelings for a man, Xavier, but he's like in his 30s or 40s and ends up dating her mom. I thought that was disgusting. I guess they sort of tried to recreate that in the show with Zach, who becomes Ella's boyfriend for a while and hits on Hannah, but it was way more hardcore and gross in the books, and I did not like it, especially because he's sexually harasses Aria. The girls keep hearing this giggle, which is actually A, and it will happen at random points, and I think it's meant to remind us that A is always watching and is laughing at things they're doing. Realistically, it doesn't make any sense for them to be able to hear this giggle. Like, they'll be at a dinner party and they'll hear from downstairs somewhere this giggle. Don't try and do anything to grab A, they just sort of sit there like, huh, how weird. Maybe she was crazy, but she swore she heard a laugh. It sounded like someone snickering gleefully, delighted that things were going precisely according to plan. And that will be like when they're inside the kitchen. So you'll be like, wait, where is this giggle coming from? Are they upstairs in your house? Are they outside the kitchen window in the bushes? Where are they? She heard this giggle echoing off the walls. She tensed and looked around. Did you guys hear that? Wilden paused from his coffee and peered about the room. Bad windows, it's just a draft. Then everyone went back to eating like nothing was amiss, but Spencer knew it was the same laugh she'd been hearing for months. It was A. So where's A then? Downstairs? Outside? Then it becomes repetitive and actually loses its creepiness. Let's talk about the next book, Killer. Hannah and Kate start competing for the affections of Aria's brother, Mike Montgomery. I hated this because Mike did not deserve the attention. This is when Hannah starts realizing she genuinely likes Mike because she's spending time with him. Mike is continually making jokes about hookers, around wanting to grab a girl's ass. He's never talking about wanting to get to know a girl. It's just, oh, I want to hook up with her. I want to make out with her. She's hot. Every 2 seconds, something out of his mouth is something dirty-minded. Aria, for instance, at times will just roll her eyes and be like, oh, Mike, silly old Mike. And then Hannah at multiple points says that she loves Mike's dirty sense of humor, and he's just got an edgy sense of humor, as if he's just really funny and he's being sarcastic and making these comments, but it does not hit that way. It just sounds like he's objectifying women for the fun of it continually. And at points, Hannah and Mike will have moments where Mike's like, oh no, I wanted to wait to sleep with the girl until I was ready, as if he wants this emotional connection, but it doesn't line up with what we know about him. Or when they get back together, he says, good, you have to perform a striptease for me as an apology. It's like, is this meant to be funny? Because I just find it gross, and I think it's meant to be like, oh, stop it, Mike, you're so silly, ha ha ha. But it's not funny, it's just creepy. Especially when you compare her relationship with him to Lucas, who had this emotional connection with her more so. In Heartless, no one believes the girls when they insist that they saw Allison. Aria visits a medium who produces a message in Ali's handwriting that states that Ali killed Ali. This makes her think, did Ali commit suicide? And it also alludes to twins, because it suggests that one girl who looks exactly like Allison killed Allison, which is a huge clue for what happens later on in the books with the A reveal, and was very well done. There is a twin in these books, which I'll talk about in part 2. There is a twin, but the clues are phenomenal, like so good. Now, I know at points, like I said, the book isn't the best written maybe, but I would highly suggest you go and read it after this video because it's so well done. For instance, there are loads of signs that Allison's family has secrets. They were at one point hanging outside Allison's house and they were hearing her talking and someone imitating her voice. Later on, we find out it was the twin, but at the time the girls are thinking it was Jason bullying her and pretending to copy her voice. There are so many clues throughout the whole series, whereas in the show the clues were either non-existent or rushed. No one cares, it came out of left field. You don't need to be some sort of literature analyst to know that. It's just obviously bad writing. If you're gonna do a twin, at least do it right, and it was done right in the books in my opinion. Throughout the books, after Ren, that relationship made sense, but I really loved Spencer's storylines in the beginning involving her family and thinking maybe she hurt Allison because she can't remember stuff correctly, but her storylines keep getting worse because they keep involving her romantic relationships, and often the relationships in question are really poorly written. They're really bad because a guy will come along and then he'll just disappear. And yes, it's interesting at the time, but ultimately it feels pointless. And by like the 4th one, I was thinking, why am I reading this? Because he's not going to mean anything. There's one guy she meets who she has a big crush on, but he thinks he's gay. And then he gets really angry at her because she exposes his gay, and then we just never see him again. Another guy who she really liked, but it turns out he was a traitor and he actually didn't like her and he was working for A or something. And then another guy where she likes him, but then it turns out he was meeting her for his brother who had a few facial deformities or something, so he was self-conscious and thinking he wasn't attractive, so he'd send his brother, so she ends up liking both of them, and that doesn't go anywhere. And just so many times where it's exhausting because it's just such a waste of time in my mind, because I want to actually know the relationship means something and is useful and contributes something, but it ultimately was like filler, waffle. So in Wanted, Hannah and Mike get back together. Again, they're having this banter, making jokes about objectifying women or intimacy as if it's kind of funny, but it doesn't even seem funny, and there's not really like an emotional connection there. So I'm continually shocked where it seems like Mike really cares about Hannah and wants to be in a relationship with her and only her, because everything he's saying contradicts that and makes it sound like he's a bit of a ladies' man and he just wants to hook up with loads of women. So him wanting this sort of monogamy and to be with her doesn't make sense at all, especially in like the finale of the series. He tells her he wants to marry her because he's worried she's going to go to jail. So he's literally like, let's get married, even though he's 17 at the time. Why would he want that? Mike was always saying he wants to hook up with different women, and why would he want this committed relationship when he's so young? Why is this part of the story? It made truly no sense. So I'm kind of resentful she didn't end up with Lucas, to be honest. They discover that the girl they were friends with for years when they were younger, before she disappeared, was actually Courtney, a twin sister of Allison, basically. So the girl they were calling Allison was actually Courtney. The girl that Emily was in love with wasn't Allison, it was actually Courtney. There's some confusion there around who was in the mental hospital and who wasn't, but they learned that basically the girl they knew and loved and mourned for was Courtney. And meanwhile, they end up meeting the sister, Allison, and she's saying basically she wants to be their friend even though her sister's gone, because she was sick for a while but now she's back and everything's fine, so the girls are getting to know her. Emily has a massive crush on this new Allison even though she never knew her before, which is obviously putting her in a lot of mental turmoil because she thought she liked the twin sister, but it's all very confusing for her. She's thinking, do I actually like Allison, or is it just that she looks exactly like the beautiful girl who I was in love with and now is gone? Spencer gets a frantic call from her mother telling her that Melissa, her sister, has disappeared. And Spencer had begun to believe that her sister was the one who killed Ali, but now she's like, wait, my sister's gone. So you've got a really bad feeling, especially because when they're getting in Allison's car, they heard this banging from the boot. So I wonder what's going on there. As they get to the house to hang out, it's revealed to them that Allison is A, and she tries to set the house on fire. They are able to escape, and they actually find Melissa, who'd been kidnapped and hidden in the closet, along with the dead Ian, who Allison murdered. And throughout the books, Allison kills a hell of a lot of people. She's a serial killer, and it really heightens the stakes because you realize she has no remorse and she'll just kill anyone. Allison, as they escape, is trapped in the fire. They don't know where she's gone, she's disappeared, but Emily left the door open for her, so it is possible she escaped. As it's happening, it's just getting more and more and more creepy. The readers are meant to know something's wrong way before the girls know something's wrong. She gives Hannah this bikini in a size 0, acting as if she just thought Hannah was a size 0, and Hannah is so flattered because she's always wanted to be a size 0. You can see the manipulation coming in because she's giving Hannah what she wants. You're not fully sure, but you've got suspicions, and the girls are pretty much in blissful ignorance, aside from maybe Aria, who's suspicious, but even she comes around. Allison's being weird around Emily, giving her mixed signals. She's saying she's interested in being really passionate, but then she's stringing her along and being dismissive, and she's treating Aria really weird. It's like when she senses Aria isn't buying it, she does all the stuff going above and beyond to manipulate Aria and get Aria on side and turn Aria against her own boyfriend. I really like that all the girls have a personal connection to Allison and to Courtney, to both of them. They have unique relationships with both of them, whereas in the show it's like no one even knew Spencer's twin, no one even knew she existed, so there was no emotional impact, whereas they're actually getting to know Allison. What I like too is the girls are intentionally not telling each other stuff in the books for ages until they finally start to become close. Like they'll be threatened by A and be sent out on missions by A or tricked by A or having all these relationship problems, and they'll never tell each other stuff. They'll never communicate. It wasn't until the final book with Allison's return that her coming back in some senses brought them together, and especially after Allison's betrayal when she's revealed to be A, they rely on each other more than ever, and they realize their relationship is so much better and healthier without her there. The book begins with the girls vacationing in Jamaica and them seeing a girl who they think is Ali. It's actually not Ali, but they think it is, and they're thinking Allison's still out there, especially when they start getting new threats from A. There are like so many books, like 8-9 books after this, all of which with Allison being revealed as A. We know who A is, but it's just A trying to bring down the girls. They don't know where she is, they don't know where she's at, they don't know how she's watching them. They don't even know if she's alive at points, but they know it has to be her because they're getting threatened. It's so much more eerie and scary than what happened in the show, where A is never really there. Alex Drake was introduced for like 2 minutes and then dies, whereas Allison we see working her magic. It doesn't matter, we know her identity. That doesn't take away from the thrill of it, even though there's not as much mystery maybe. We're still wondering, how is she managing to screw them over? How is she going to bring them down? And it's just as interesting to watch as when we didn't know her identity as A. Emily becomes friends with this girl called Chloe, but it's completely ruined when Chloe's dad hits on Emily. Again, I don't know why this was necessary. He's not held accountable for it. Nothing happens with it. She just loses a friendship over it and feels really shitty about herself. Again, why? I wasn't really sure about the normalization of predators in the book, so I actually understand now why the show had such a problem with it, because when you look at the books, it's like a continuous thing. At this point, I was so hyped to see how the direction of the books would change and how it would stay interesting. Despite us knowing A's identity, despite knowing it's Allison, how would it stay suspenseful and interesting? At some point, Allison tries to even get them sent to jail. You even learn more about Courtney, and that's really interesting too. So I'll give you an update in part 2 of this video, but I have read all of the books, so it won't take too long. But I really hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely go and read the books if you want to. There's so much I've missed out, so you won't be like spoiled or feeling like, oh, I know the direction of where it's going, so it's pointless, because so much happens. Kind of a trashy, dramatic soap opera, but in the best of ways. I do movie commentary mostly on my channel, and I talk about TV shows and stuff, so if any of that interests you, make sure you stick around and follow me on Instagram if you want to see more behind the scenes stuff. And I will do a video soon about unpopular opinions, so make sure you follow me on Instagram so you can send in your comments for that. And I will see you guys for my next video.